We believe that John Hersey demonstrated in his book Hiroshima the importance of civil responsibility guided by an ethical and moral considerations, as a moral compass that should always guide people's and government's actions when a man-made disaster occurs or may occur.
Hiroshima is a book written by John Hersey, which was first published in 1946. It is a non-fiction account of the experience of 6 people who survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6 of 1945. Hersey's account focuses on the human toll of the bombing rather than on the military or political context in which it occurred. One of the essential themes of the book is the destructive power of nuclear weapons and the devastating consequences that they can have on innocent civilians. Hersey's account also highlights the resilience and determination of survivors who are shown coping with the unimaginable physical and physiological trauma in the aftermath of the bombing.
The mood of the book is somber and reflective because Hersey tries to understand and focuses on the survivors' emotion and thoughts. The tone is objective and compassionate because he seeks to present the survivors' stories in a respectful way to make the reader connect with the emotions that the characters are feeling. The book tries to raise awareness about the defective effects of the nuclear weapons and to humanize the victims. He talks more about the human consequences it created more than the economic or political effects the bomb had. And as he gave his public opinion, it helped a lot to raise awareness in the years that followed.
The context is that the atomic bomb in Hiroshima was the second and last atomic bomb ever launched for the war purposes. It was dropped on August 6 of 1945 by the USA on Hiroshima. Thanks to this bomb, Japan gives up the Second World War ends. It's important to mention that 140,000 people were killed due to this event and many more people suffered health issues many years after the explosion due to the radiation generated by the bomb. This is a man-made disaster as it is a catastrophe which man were entirely responsible for. On the other hand, to understand our claim, it must be shown the civil responsibility can stand for 2 things. First, the feeling of being responsible for a civilian or someone. This is a concept that most experts recommend politicians keep in mind as the concept in which take their decisions regarding their status power. Also, it stands for the obligation of subjects who cause damage to compensate the recipient. Finally, it is important to note that the civil responsibility is guided by ethical and moral values. Saying this is important to understand that ethical considerations and values stand for the sense of good and bad imposed by the regulations of a society or culture. On the other hand, moral considerations and values stand for the sense of good and bad of a single human being. At last, it's important to mention that these ethical and moral considerations
constitute a moral compass, which is what guides people's actions, defining and taking into account what's good and what's bad. So, we believe that John Hersey demonstrates in his book the importance of civil responsibility guided by ethical and moral considerations as a moral compass that should always guide people's and governments' actions when a man-made disaster occurs or may occur.
Because after the bomb explodes, the book Hiroshima shows how some people, guided by civil responsibility, helped save many people's lives and helped mitigate the suffering of many people.
This can be seen especially through the eyes of Mr. Tanimoto, who puts the necessities of others above his, by carrying water to the wounded and tirelessly ferrying people to higher ground. For hours and days, he physically carries people, rows a boat, organizes groups to help each other, and rescues people from the river. This can be seen in the chapter 3 of the book, especially in this part, when John Hersey mentions that the schoolyard was filled with wounded and dying people, crying for help. Mr. Tanimoto went back to the riverside again and again, bringing one group after another to the scant sanctuary of the parade ground. All around him, in the water and on the land, he could hear people screaming and groaning. Through the rest of the day and the night, and the next day, he worked without stopping, saving many lives, burying the dead and helping the sufferers. At midnight of the second day, he was so exhausted that he went into one of the shelters and collapsed on top of a woman who had already died.
As we can see, through this, he ended up saving many lives, and he ended up helping many people who were suffering the consequences of the bomb, being a clear example of how civil responsibility can save and help many people. Also, we believe our claim is valid because Hiroshima, by presenting all the suffering caused by the atomic bomb, invites the reader to reflect upon if the launching of the bomb was justified or not, and if the governments of Japan and the United States of America did well on war decisions, putting the concept of civil responsibility over their interests, over their power, political, economic, and social interests, or not.
Through the whole book, thanks to the descriptive language of the book, we connect with many characters and their suffering, such as with Mrs. Nakamura, who has a hard time taking care of herself and her 3 children, and we end up thinking if all this suffering could have been avoided, and if yes, how. This can be seen especially on a part of the chapter 2, where John Hersey mentions she, Mrs. Nakamura, did not think about her own safety now, only about her children. She ran out of the house and shouted their names, but the noise of the planes and the bombs and the firing drowned her voice. She became aware of the smell of smoke and the taste of ashes and saw that it was growing dark. Then, for the first time, she heard people near her crying for water. She remembered that she had seen a mountain pool nearby and stumbled toward it. The ground was hot, and the walking hurt her raw feet. By reflecting upon this, most readers end up concluding that the decisions of war taken by Japan and the United States of America were not the best and were not entirely driven by civil responsibility, due to a lack of ethical and moral values of the world and the people with power at the time, as at the time the United Nations was not created and there were few ethical and moral considerations that could guide as a moral compass many actions of the politicians and the powers of the world, and many readers end up thinking that all this suffering could have been avoided if politicians guided their decisions based on civil responsibility. Based on this, we can say that John Hersey invites readers to reflect upon the historical background of the atomic bomb and all the decisions that could avoid all the suffering caused by the atomic bomb.
Although all this, some can argue that John Hersey's Hiroshima do not demonstrate the importance of civil responsibility guided by ethical and moral considerations as a moral compass that should always guide people and governments' actions when a man-made disaster occurs or may occur. Some can argue that this was not the main purpose of John Hersey's when writing the book, and they support this by saying that there is no explicit part where he makes a reflection on civil responsibility and its importance in a man-made disaster. But we believe that although he does not explicitly talk about this, he generates an impact on the reader that makes the reader think, infer, and reflect upon this. Also, many articles sustain this, showing many readers and academic people have also found this connection and intention in John Hersey's book.
For example, the article John Hersey and Hiroshima, The Need for a Moral Compass, an article by John Michalczyk in the Boston College Chronicle, argues that John Hersey's Hiroshima underscores the importance of a moral compass in guiding human actions, especially during times of crisis. The article notes that the book reveals the dangers of a lack of moral responsibility in the context of nuclear war and encourages readers to be guided by ethical principles in all situations. Based on this, we can say that although John Hersey did not explicitly make a reflection on civil responsibility and its importance in a man-made disaster, Through his book, he invites the reader to make this connection and reflect upon civil responsibility as a moral compass that should always guide people's actions, especially when a man-made disaster occurs, of this magnitude occurs.
To conclude, the book Hiroshima by John Hersey presents a powerful account of the devastating consequences of the atomic bomb, while also emphasizing the importance of civil responsibility and ethical decision-making during times of crisis. From the perspective of individuals like Mr. Tanimoto, who put the needs of others above their own, the book shows how civil responsibility can save lives and mitigate suffering. Additionally, by inviting readers to reflect on the decision to use the atomic bomb and the actions of the governments involved, the book encourages readers to consider the role of civil responsibility in guiding ethical decision-making. While some may argue that the book does not explicitly discuss civil responsibility, the text suggests that it generates an impact on readers that encourages them to reflect on this topic. We think that the book serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of human actions and the importance of acting with compassion and responsibility during times of crisis. Also, the book made us reflect that the use of gunpowder and massive destruction weapons is not the best method to end or either develop a war, as it only produces suffering for the innocent. To wrap up, as Michelle Moody Adams from Columbia University said, through his meticulous reporting and compassionate storytelling, John Hersey's Hiroshima offers a profound lesson on the importance of civil responsibility and ethical considerations in times of crisis. The book challenges us to reflect on our own values and commitments and to consider how we might respond to catastrophic events with compassion, courage, and a deep sense of moral purpose.